Cool. Well, I think we can get started. So first of all, thank you for joining our webinar today. Today, we're going to be talking about how COVID led to digital transformation. I'm Matt Engstrom, Product Marketing Director here at Tinyclues. And I'm just going to give you some quick information on the topic today, talk a little bit about the content, and then just cover off on a couple easy logistics things. So first of all, what are we talking about today? So as we know, the COVID lockdown fundamentally changed the way brands had to communicate with consumers, as consumers were largely spending most of their time at home, which obviously created a circumstance where digital became hugely important. This is something we know, it's not new, but we're going to be talking a little bit around sort of how that has shifted marketer strategy and sort of forced brands, even those that weren't digital first, to develop a strategy that was essentially digital first, but not just talking about what happened, but the implications of which marketers are going to need to think about going forward in the future. So we'll be talking a little bit about what it means to be customer-centric. We're going to talk a little bit about data and strategy and business strategy as well. So I am happy to introduce David Bessis, founder and CEO at Tinyclues, as well as guest speaker Rusty Warner, VP and Principal Analyst at Forrester. So welcome, gentlemen, and thank you for joining today. Really quickly, just in terms of content, we're going to go through some high-level information, just a few slides, nothing too painful, just to set the stage and the tone for the discussion today. And then we're going to just have a discussion between David and Rusty talking about some of the themes that we'll be going over. In terms of logistics, really easy. If you have a question, feel free to pop it into the little Q&A widget at the bottom of your screen today. We're not going to answer questions throughout, but we have reserved time at the end. So if you have a question, you can put it in the chat at any time. And then basically what we'll do is we'll go through and kind of address them at the end, but feel free to ask throughout so you don't forget later on. So I think that just about covers it from an introduction perspective. So Rusty, I'm going to turn it over to you, and I've put together some interesting content for us to kick it off with today.
Great. Well, thanks, Matt. And thanks everyone for joining today. So as Matt said, we're going to talk through just a few slides to set the stage before we then get into a discussion. And I'd like to start with how we know the pandemic has changed things for us as consumers. And I probably don't have to give you the numbers. You already know this because you're all experiencing it, as we all are. But we've been talking to people about their expectations and what they see themselves doing as we are on the road to recovery, which hopefully that light in the tunnel is getting closer and isn't an oncoming train. But we know that even after we're back to whatever normal is, that a lot of people's behavior will have changed. We have people telling us that they'll still avoid crowds, that they don't want to go out and spend time in a store, and that they expect that they will be spending more time at home. So while a lot of people perhaps have been at home enough and want to get out there, there are just as many who expect that they'll still spend more time at home than perhaps they did in the past. And that's because the level of recovery is going to be different for everyone depending on their individual circumstances. People who unfortunately may have been ill or felt vulnerable, or those who have lost loved ones, those who have had severe impact to their employment, we have to expect that they're going to feel a bit traumatized, and it won't be business as usual for those people on day one. Whereas there will be others at the complete opposite end of the spectrum who can't wait to get back out there and just get back to, again, whatever normal means to them. I think the biggest group here, though, will be the ones in survival mode, the ones who do want to try to get back to business as usual, but realize that things have changed and will have adapted their behavior and will continue to adapt their behavior moving forward. We also know from talking to consumers around the world, and we have data on this across North America, Europe, and Asia, that a lot of people feel uncertain about recovery at this point. They think that perhaps the worst isn't behind us in terms of the impact to the economy that the pandemic might leave with us. And so that means that people will react a bit differently, again, depending on individual circumstances. And if you're in a brand or you're representing marketing for a brand, you'll have to think about these new segments that might be out there, where people that perhaps are just as concerned about their finances as they are about their health may not welcome your marketing messages and may not be ready for you to start personalizing things and making offers to them. They're just not spending money at this point in time. Others who perhaps are not as worried about their health, but do still worry about their finances, are going to be those bargain seekers who are looking for a discount or an offer or a promotion, and that might be the best way to reach them. People who have the money to spend will still be different based on how they feel about their health and their security. There will be those people, as I mentioned, who want to stay at home and continue to shelter for a bit longer, where there will then be others who want to get out there and get back into the world and get back to business as usual. And the way we would represent our brand to these different groups will be very different. What we recommend that brands do is what we've always recommended, which is that they listen to their customers, that they then define a strategy that will make them a leader in the market based on that understanding of customers, and that they connect the dots across the organization so they deliver consistently where customers are concerned. And finally, that they capture insights so that they can continuously measure and optimize where they are as a business. So no matter if you're in marketing or you're in another business function, we think the number one thing you need to do is understand your customers. Secondly, use that understanding to define your brand strategy. And then finally, then you need to deliver experiences that live up to that brand strategy every single day. Now, when you are thinking about the technology that enables you to do that, you'll need to invest for the capabilities that will let you represent your brand to all of those different people that we mentioned, regardless of how they might be feeling about the pandemic or about their finances. So you will need technologies that deliver acquisition campaigns that are based on segments, because you probably don't know those prospects well enough to truly personalize an experience to them. There's always things you can do to make sure you're personalized within segments, but by and large, those will be your acquisition campaigns. But then for those people who do respond, who engage with the brand, you're going to want to make sure that what you do with them is contextually relevant based on their circumstances and based on their needs. And then for a subset of your customers, and how big that subset is will vary significantly across different brands. But for that subset of customers that you know really well, and you have a lot of data that they've shared with you, and you're using that data in a privacy and trust-based way, then you can apply some predictive analytics. You can begin to anticipate what they want and serve their needs more in the moment, as opposed to just being responsive. So you'll need technologies that work together to let you do different things depending on the people you're trying to reach and their particular circumstances. Now, getting that right takes a lot of practice, and it will be trial and error for a lot of organizations. But we think of this as putting you on your way to becoming an insights-driven business. So you're not just data aware or data driven, you're actually able to use that data to derive insights that will guide your decision making. Notice here that we are talking about business decisions. So obviously that data will be really useful for you when you're forming segments or trying to personalize offers to individual customers. But more than that, that customer data will be a lifeline for you as you're making better business decisions for how you should serve your customers overall, or how your brand strategy needs to evolve given whatever normal is as we see ourselves on the road to recovery. And that means that your analytics become critical, And if you haven't made investments in advanced analytics and predictive analytics and artificial intelligence, then definitely that's something you're going to need to do. But you'll merge and leverage those analytics in combination with your business expertise. And here we've called it business rules because when you program them into a system, we think of them far beyond that creativity of the humans in the organization so that those analytics can work well and support your business strategy. And then finally, it doesn't stop with a one-off execution. You will need to do this on a continuous basis. So you will apply your analytics and your rules. Then you will collect data so that you can understand what's happening with your customers as they pursue their journeys with the brand. And you'll want to optimize their experiences. And at the same time, you'll want to use that insight to optimize your strategy and make sure that you're performing as a company. So that was a quick overview. I'm going to hand it back over to Matt now, and we'll get started with the discussion. So Matt, back to you.
Cool. Thank you so much, Rusty. I think that provides some really great context and a really nice jumping off point into our first section of our discussion today. You talked a lot about sort of business strategy, understanding customer behavior, and then being able to sort of connect that information about your customer back into your marketing and also wider business strategy, which I think is really interesting. And at Tinyclues, we talk about like sort of these opposing forces sometimes that marketers face between essentially delivering for business goals. So things like quarterly revenue goals, new product pushes, things like this can actually really influence what a marketer needs to plan for, how they build their strategy, which actually ultimately at times goes at odds with their goal of putting customers first. And that's basically done through a lot of what you described around understanding them and being a market leader through your understanding of customers and being able to use that information to deliver for your customer and for your business. And I think, you know, during the COVID lockdown, digital transformation that we're talking about, I think customer centricity potentially shifted in terms of how you can put customers first, what sort of data you look at, et cetera. And I think what would be interesting is to sort of talk a little bit about how potentially customer centricity has shifted during this time and what that means for marketer and business strategy and how they might be able to think about sort of bridging that gap. So for this particular topic, Rusty, let's start with you on this one.
Yeah, I'm glad, Matt, that you said that you run into that topic with your customers. I run into it a lot with Forrester clients that I talk to, where they will say to me, of course we want to be customer centric. Of course we are focused on the customer and we put the customer first, but we still have the day job. We really need to focus on those business objectives that we have, whether that's to acquire more customers or do more upsell or cross-sell. And it comes down to revenue and profit for the company because we are a business after all. So it is a trick, I think, finding that balance between those business objectives and the customer. I've
Steve, we're losing you.
It's a little bit. I am seeing that these companies are thinking about how to define more customer-focused metrics and then see how the business metrics align with that. So if I can improve customer satisfaction and customer experience, can I measure that impact on the revenue or that impact on profit or long-term loyalty and try to understand what that means for my acquisition and retention numbers? So I think there's a lot of work going on to try to tie those two worlds.
Rusty, your Wi-Fi is kind of skipping a little bit, but I think we got most of your message. You mentioned the metrics, and there's another dimension, another angle to that, and it's something that we started to see with some of the customers, especially in the retail space, in the past, and it's still honestly the way it's done at many companies. There is, the marketing is decided upstream by people who run the category management or the partnerships. They are in charge of commerce and deciding which offer should be put forward, and then the marketing has to execute that. Now, the problem with that, it's the absence of customer centricity by design. Because if the organization is structured like that, there's nothing you can do, even if you have the best metrics and the best tools for matching the customers with what they want. If the marketing is just there to execute something that's been decided somewhere else, it's very hard to do. Now, the new trend, that's something we saw in the past 12 months at a couple of our retail clients, is a shift in the organization where a single manager is in charge of both the category management and the marketing. And that's interesting. It's the trend about, some chief customer officer or chief revenue officer or whatever you want to call that. There's definitely a trend. People realize that they have to make their organization smarter if they want to be able to become really customer centric.
Cool. Really interesting points, guys. And I think, that, like David, you were talking specifically about kind of like the usage of data for insights and decision-making. And I think we can't talk about digital transformation specifically unless we talk a little bit more about data, which in and of itself can be transformative as marketers, get access to different types of data, or as consumer behavior shifts, the data can sort of indicate to you like how you should be reaching them, building relationships, building your strategy, et cetera. And I think like we're talking a little bit now and over the last year as the lockdown has changed consumer behavior about potentially the type of data that marketers are looking for, potentially getting a little bit closer to customers as acquisition costs have increased with that data. And then I think, talking a little bit about what you were mentioning, Rusty, around sort of this idea that it's not just data that marketers, customer data specifically, that marketers use to build strategy. It's like aligning the business goals behind some of this as well. And I think we're talking earlier about that gap between customer centricity and business goals. And this is potentially like a way to be able to deliver on that. So let's talk a little bit sort of about potentially how like data, what the data is that marketers are looking at has shifted over the last year and what that means going forward, potentially what that means for marketer strategy, but also that wider business implication as well. So a few things rolled up into this section in one. So David, let's start with you on this topic.
Yeah, and there's something to realize about the COVID crisis is beyond the demand side shock that Rusty has described with the new reality of the life of people and their priorities, which have been changing. There is also a supply shift. And it's hard to ignore. I mean, it depends on your industry, but in some industries, I just mentioned the bubble tea industry. It's a ridiculous example, but it's kind of impressive. I mean, nobody would have expected that. And of course, there are some industries where it's even more obvious. I mean, if you are in the hospitality or airline business where something has changed, you have to take that into account. Now, if you come back to how do you become customer centric, you have to realize that the way of building your marketing in the past was in June this year, you're going to repeat what you were doing in June in the prior year, which itself was what you were doing in June in the prior year. It was like very slow evolution of your marketing plan. Now, this became obsolete like overnight. Supply has changed, demand has changed, and there is no way you can replicate what you were doing. Rusty was mentioning that some customers is not even acceptable to reach out to them. So what do you do? What do you do? Seriously, how do you build your marketing plan? Well, there's when the crisis struck, it was a moment where we were experimenting with some new capabilities we had put in the product about understanding where your revenue is coming from, kind of seeing a large-scale map seen from above, where your revenue is coming from, what are the trends, is it going up, going down, and will it be a successful marketing topic? Marketing topic is successful when you can actually identify, profile the people who are buying in that category. And let me give you an example of something we saw with one of our clients. It's a retail client with very diversified offering. One of the entertainment product category, the revenue was stable, but it was 50% less people buying 2x more, which means that for these people, it had become overnight something really critical, like the spend had doubled. And we could really recognize these people. Now, when you're able to do that, of course, It gives you insight about what's happening real time in your data. So this is really customer data teaching lessons to the organization about what is working right now, what can be successful. And it goes back to what I was mentioning about the organization. If you don't have the ability to change based on that, then you're going to be in trouble. Rusty, is it, do you have any?
Sorry about that. I think it dropped for a second. Hopefully you can hear me now. But yeah, we've seen some of the same things in talking to our clients, David. And I think you're absolutely right. You can't market today or go to market and try to execute a business plan based on yesterday's data or last month's data or last year's data the way you might have done. Seasonality is out the window for the most part, and you really have to have that current view of your customers. And what we saw was a lot of marketing organizations had the best data to help the company make better decisions because they had their finger on the pulse of what was happening with customers. What were customers buying? What were they browsing? What were they responding to in marketing campaigns? So marketing's data became a bit of a...
Rusty, we lost you again. Rusty, we lost you. Marketing data became, and then we missed the end of a sentence. That was the most interesting part, but we missed it.
Well, what I was going to say, it became a treasure trove. And for organizations that had considered the marketing data to be that front office data, which was used for campaigns or to talking to customers, but it wasn't used by the rest of the business, I think they learned quickly that that's where a lot of the value was for the company.
Great. Yeah, and I think a lot of that makes sense. And I think we've been obviously talking specifically now sort of about the use of data, digital transformation, customer centricity, kind of a lot of like big themes. And I know, David, you gave a couple really interesting specific examples, but it'd be interesting, I think, to contextualize some of what we've been discussing a little bit more specifically within how some businesses potentially over the last year have had to embrace digital transformation, not just from potentially like a marketing perspective, but operationally as well, and what that could potentially mean for strategy going forward. Because I think I doubt that it's going to be a situation where everybody's just going to go back out post-pandemic, everything's going to return to the way it was 2 years ago, and we're going to move on. So I think it'll be interesting to hear maybe around some specific use cases, even if it's not, even if we can't name the brand specifically, around how some businesses actually transformed and what it could potentially mean for them going forward. So Rusty, let's start with you on this topic.
Sure. And hopefully you can hear me okay, Matt, if you could nod your head. Sorry about the difficulties here. We're
losing you again, Rusty.
Well, David, it sounds like you're telling me I dropped out again.
Oh yeah.
Okay, well, hopefully you can hear me. So I've talked to companies that didn't have a digital presence in countries where they really needed them. For example, one of the big European retailers works with a distribution partner for the Middle East who operates that brand's presence across multiple countries in the Middle East. And they told me how they were only up and running with e-commerce in a half dozen countries, and they needed to double that quickly. Now, fortunately, they had some marketing communications that they had been doing on a digital basis, even though it was based on physical shopping, and they could convert that quickly once they got the e-commerce up and going so that they could continue that engagement with the customers. I've talked to other brands who are in the health and beauty sector, especially cosmetics companies, where we know that there's a lot of purchases that happen in physical stores because people like to see those products and experience those products and go to the beauty counter in a store, if it's a bespoke store or a department store. So trying to do that online with a digital experience was difficult for people. And at the same time, they needed to switch up their messaging. It was no longer, how do you look good for going out? It was, how do you take care of yourself at home? How do you pamper yourself? How do you make sure you still look good for the camera, even if your internet's not going to do a good job when you're broadcasting a webinar? So they had to change their messages quite a bit, as well as convert what they used to do in the in the physical stores to make sure that they could still deliver that connection using a digital channel.
That's interesting. One of the things that struck me in conversation with CMOs during that period was that the lines between physical and digital were blurred. Like they were like thinking digitally about things that were physical. Like one example is, the cycle of innovation in the digital industry is like 10x faster than the cycle of innovation about physical retail. But during the lockdown phase, for example, I was speaking with one of the clients in the DIY space, and they had like overnight to introduce new delivery modes where you would pick, your stuff would be put in your trunk without you getting out of your car. It's drive-through delivery was not part of the DNA, and they had to implement that like in a matter of days. And that kind of cycle of innovation was led by digital. And I find it super interesting to realize that digital is not just about the media, it's about a way of operating and the kind of degree of agility and culture and way that, you measure stuff, you iterate, you go quickly and you do that. So there's something about digital that is more than digital, it's about the digital culture of the teams and the management.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I think really interesting examples, and it's nice to see kind of some of the stuff that we've been talking about actually employed in various ways by different businesses to sort of adapt to changing consumer behavior, and also that the implications of this are probably a little bit more long-term than we've been thinking. So I think we're going to go, next section is we're going to go into Q&A in a bit. So if you have questions, please type them into the chat and we can address them in a few minutes. But I think as sort of like a final closing to the discussion section, it would be great we talked a lot about sort of some of the future trends that we anticipate will happen based on changes and significant changes in the environment over the last year around the pandemic lockdown as things start to open up. So it'd be great to get like maybe 30 seconds from each of you on some sort of some interesting trend or thought that you have that either we've kind of touched on or something that we haven't had a chance to discuss that you think is going to be hugely impactful going through, the next year, 2 years beyond. So David, let's start with you on this one.
Yeah, so Rusty was talking about the treasure trove. That's actually when you got censored by the Wi-Fi. But it was an interesting moment saying that customer data was a treasure trove. My prediction is around there. I think that customer data will be the basis for a new alliance between marketing and IT. In the past 10 years, with the digital transformation, there was something of an antagonism between marketing and IT, because marketing was always wanting to deploy new solutions, and IT was like, should we like deploy that many solutions and not own anything? 2-3 years ago, there was that customer data platform wave, and people thought that that would be another external solution that they would buy. What we saw in the past 2 quarters is a new trend of people wanting to really internalize that. Like build your own on top of a data cloud like Google or Snowflake or something like that. And what's interesting is by building this data trove that is managed by IT, but complying with the requirements of the marketing and on which you can plug external solutions. It's a different way of operating, and I think it's creating trust, and everybody understands the role of IT in an organization. It's to protect that treasure trove and make it functional by making it interconnected with any applications, internal or external, you may want. That was more than 20 seconds, but that was a prediction.
Well, and what I would add, it's not really a trend. I think it's more of a realization that I've noticed. And maybe the pandemic has helped people see this more clearly. But I think brands are realizing that content and product offers are not the same as an experience. I think too often brands conflate what they are personalizing as a product offer and calling that the customer experience without understanding that the experience takes into consideration much, much more about the customer's perception and the way the customer is using a product, the way the customer responds emotionally to that product or that service. And I think people are beginning to realize that we can't conflate a product offer or some digital personalization with the overall experience. It's only a part of it.
Cool, thanks. And I think that's somewhat relevant to one of the questions that we've received. So we talked a little bit about digital first, a little bit about adapting to a digital first environment, but we do have, obviously, there's a lot of companies that have sort of operated brick and mortar that maybe have adapted digital strategies in addition to that. So do you see an environment where sort of like traditional brick and mortar enterprises are going to have to adapt to having a hybrid model in terms of the way that they build relationships with customers, sell products, drive people either in store or online? Kind of what do you see sort of shifting potentially there, or the future of that looking like?
Well, I'll jump in. I think the internet's stable at the moment, so I'll go first, David. There were already a number of brands who were trying to bridge that gap between the digital and the physical world. I mentioned the cosmetics and healthcare industry, lots of examples of brands who had lots of digital technology in the store so that when you were there physically and you were trying products and experimenting with different products, you could capture that and it would become part of a digital profile. And then it was easier for you when you went to the e-commerce site or the website to continue that experience, and the products would be familiar to you because you had seen them, with your own eyes in the store. So we'd already seen some of that, and I think there will be more of that. I think also there's a realization of the importance of the human connection. So even when it's not bricks and mortar in terms of a place I might walk into, but it's not really online either. Let's say it's an advisor or an agent or a contact center, someone I'm going to talk to on the phone, but there's a human at the other end of that experience as opposed to it being purely digital. I think that a lot of organizations, especially in financial services and insurance, have realized the importance of the human connection, and that we'll see a lot more being done to bridge the experience between those human assisted channels that might not be brick and mortar, but might be voice, bridging that gap with the digital experience as well.
Great. Thank you, Rusty. Very interesting.
I mean, I don't have much to add. I think it's a good, fairly complete answer. And what's interesting is we're doing a webinar, which is something digital, but we're still about humans. And I think people are getting used to the fact that human interaction is happening online. And so, it's about blurring the line. I mean, is it physical or not when you see people? It's somewhere in between.
Yeah, very interesting. We have one more question, a little bit, I think like higher level, sort of around the role of marketing. So in a world where marketers may be increasingly focused on customers, what will that potentially change in terms of the role that marketing may play in the organization? And will it change the role of the CMO itself? I think that's probably in reference to sort of this customer focus that we've been talking about and the implications for the wider business.
Well, maybe it's about marketing becoming marketing, because marketing should be about the market, about the people. And it's not just about executing, pre-programmed, pre-decided blast of messaging to some people. It's not just about messaging. It's not about reaching out. It's about understanding people. So that fraction of marketing was always part of the promise, but it was hard to deliver on it. And it looks like it's finally possible with customer data.
And we've been seeing it.
We're losing you again, Rusty. So Rusty, we lost you. We did not get your.
Okay. Well, I think you gave a great answer to the question, so I'll stop there.
Okay, cool. Thank you very much, guys. So I think that's the end of the questions that we have for today. So I think we can conclude. So I just want to say, first of all, thank you so much for dialing in. For those of you who had a chance to, I know it's been a long year of digital conferences and webinars, but really appreciate your time. Hope you found some value. Please provide some feedback by reaching out to us directly. If you have a question that wasn't answered today, you can also reach out and we'd be happy to field that for you. Thank you again, Rusty and David, for your time. Really appreciate the discussion today. Lots of interesting points I think folks can take with them today. And we look forward to being able to provide you more great content in the future as well. So thank you so much and have a great week, everybody.
Thanks a lot. And thank you, Rusty.
Thank you.